The Macabre World podcast is brought to you by Darker Art Studio, home of real human bone jewelry. Stock and custom pieces are available, so visit us on the web at www.darkerartstudio.com and show them your darker art side. Macabre World, a podcast from Darker Art Studio, where we explore the dark, strange, and unusual from this world and beyond. Hello and welcome to the Macabre World podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Digati. We're going to try that again. You can do this too. We can.
Well, let me ask you: are we going to use the video at all?
No.
Oh, okay, good.
So you can pick your nose or whatever.
Yeah, well, that's why I asked. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to try that one more time. See if I can say my own name straight. Hello and welcome to the Macabre World podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Digati, and with me is Stephen H. Martin. He is the host of the Truth About Life podcast. He is the editor and publisher at Oakley Press, and he is the author of Afterlife, The Whole Truth, as well as several other best-selling books. Thank you so much and welcome, Stephen.
Great to be here, Rocky. Thanks for having me on your show.
So looking at your books, and folks can get a little bit more familiar with what you do by going to shmartin.com and see all the things that you're up to. But the bulk of the books that we were talking about today, because you're quite a prolific writer.
Well, I have written over 36 books, so yeah.
That's a lot.
yeah. But I've been at it for a while, almost 40 years.
Well, I guess that's not too bad. It's like a book a year, and then a little time off for good behavior.
Right.
But the bulk of the books of recent and late have to do with the afterlife, with near-death experience, experiencing the afterlife, and basically a whole lot of the unknown that we're talking about here. How did your interest in the subject matter start? Did you always write books about this? What brought this on?
It's an excellent question. The thing is, I was brought up in a home that was very scientifically minded. I would say my parents were what I call scientific materialists who believe that really the only thing that exists is matter, that there's no such thing as spirit, or that things like ESP and ghosts and all those sort of things are just figments of people's imagination. So that's the way I grew up, and that's what I thought as well, until I was about 25. I had what I guess was a near-death experience. At least it was an out-of-body experience. I was very ill with the flu. I was in bed nursing that, and I was in an apartment that I shared with two other bachelors at the time, and it was a two-level apartment, bedrooms upstairs, and I heard some people coming in down below, and then more people came in, and after a while I could hear there was a big party going on down in the first floor, and here I was upstairs in my bed with a terrible case of the flu. But being 25 years old, I made the effort to get up and put on some clothes and go downstairs to where the party was. And I had a few drinks, drank some scotch. I smoked some, whatever it was that was going around. And after a few minutes, I felt just horrible and could barely walk. In fact, I think I knee walked back upstairs to my bed, flopped down on it, and the bed seemed like it was spinning around, and I felt my chest expanded. I just went whew, and suddenly I didn't feel bad anymore. And I was looking at the ceiling, and I was looking at the little cracks in the ceiling and the kind of the dirt up there, and then I kind of turned around and looked back, and I saw my body on the bed. And I thought, how can this be? If my brain creates my consciousness, if my mind's inside my head and I'm up here, that doesn't make sense. Well, Rocky, it didn't last very long. I would say, it's hard to judge the actual time, but mainly I just was looking down at myself and thinking these kinds of thoughts of how can this possibly be, when eventually I just blacked out and didn't know anything until the next morning. I woke up, I felt much better. I felt fine. But it started me on this journey, this quest that I've been on ever since, to find out what the true nature of reality is. What is the truth? Is there an afterlife? Are we our bodies, or are we our consciousness? And of course, conclusion I've come to is that we are not our bodies. We are our consciousness, our minds, and that I have plenty of evidence that I share in these books that you've mentioned that that's the case, and that we are in fact eternal beings, eternal spiritual beings who happen to be having a temporary physical experience. So there you go. That's how it happened.
So now I'm gonna play devil's advocate, and I'm sure you're used to that. A lot of folks do, but some folks might say, well, was it really a spiritual experience, or was it the Maui Wowie talking?
Well, I wondered that too, but it is.
And to be fair, I mean, culturally, they're not mutually exclusive. A lot of, and I've spoken of this on other podcasts, a lot of cultures there have shamanic practitioners that do use hallucinogens and other types of altered consciousness substances for spiritual travel. Like specifically, peyote's the first thing that came to mind.
Sure. The American Indians, that's how their shamans, became shamans. They took trips.
Sure. And so,
magic mushrooms and all that sort of thing. But, I don't believe that is the case for a couple of reasons. I guess the most important one being that I actually, rather than feeling like I was tripping, when I was out of my body looking down, I didn't feel really anything. And I had just felt horrible, like I was gonna, throw up and everything else, when suddenly, when no longer in my physical body, I was, just very calm and peaceful and looking down, and hey. And then the other thing is, it was not the first time I'd had a little marijuana, if you want to call it that.
Fair enough. Okay. Well,
and that's not the sort of thing that I've never heard of anyone who's had an out of body experience from smoking weed.
Well, now they have the dispensaries. Who knows what you can get in there? But it's not like your buddy who grows it in the closet anymore.
Yeah,
it's a whole new thing.
Probably a whole lot better.
I'm gonna guess so. But it's had it ever happened again? Now, you described this one particular instance. I know you've talked to and interviewed, probably at this point thousands of people. But did it ever happen to you again? Did you ever have another experience?
I had another experience, but it was not the same at all. The same. It was what I will call a mystical experience. After I had that out of body experience, and I started on my quest, I read everything I could read about metaphysics. I joined the Rosicrucian order, which is an order of people that study metaphysics and mystics. And I went through all their courses and went from novice to adept. And I will say that the Rosicrucians do know what's going on, what the true nature of reality is. And so about 10 years after that first experience, I was meditating. I was in my backyard. I was married, had a child. It was a beautiful late summer day, 72 degrees, blue sky. I was on a lounge chair meditating, and I somehow reality seemed to change. And when my eyes were open, I saw auras around trees. I saw auras around the flowers. And I went into this kind of situation where I think what happened is that I I sort of merged, my mind merged with the infinite mind. I mean, when uh, it was just an incredible experience. It's very hard to explain. That it was like, the people talk about, the love and all that. Well, that was true. But whatever I thought about, it was like my mind had connected with a bigger mind that knew all the answers, and they would come to me, and this lasted, this, what I call a mystical experience. Other people have had similar ones, and they've described them to me, and I think they're very much the same, where uh, I guess it went on for about, it's hard to say, 5 minutes, half an hour, but eventually I came back out of it, and I didn't bring everything with me, but I do. I was convinced after that that there's much more to reality than we experience through our five senses. And so, yeah, that was the only other unusual kind of paranormal sort of experience that I've had. Other than that, it's been reading books and talking to people and studying. And I've talked to quantum physicists, to people who are studying whether mediums can really communicate with the dead, of people who
Can they? What have you found on that? I'm curious.
Well, there's a lady named Julie Bichelle. I've interviewed her twice. She's a PhD. She has a PhD in pharmacology. And her mother committed suicide. And Julie was brought up in a family like mine that's very scientific. But after her mother committed suicide, she wanted to find out or figure out if her mother's consciousness still existed. And so she started, first of all, she worked with Gary Schwartz, who was studying afterlife stuff in Arizona at the University of Arizona. And then she went on her own, and she founded a nonprofit called the Windbridge Institute. And I think the website is windbridge.org. And she studies mediums using double-blind tests. And she has published papers, peer-reviewed papers, that indicate that yes, some mediums, not all, some of them are definitely fakes, no question about that, but some can beat the odds as far as being able to communicate information about people who have passed away that nobody could have known in any other way. And it's been done through double-blind, very stringent scientific testing. Because as a pharmacologist, one of the things they learned how to do is study the efficacy of drugs.
Sure.
And they have,
the scientific method.
The scientific method, where they have the control group and they have the drugs, and either they work or they don't. And so yes, the answer is she can't say for certain that the medium is actually communicating with the dead person. The medium could be accessing what's called the Akashic records, which is the memory, what Carl Jung called the collective and unconscious. But they can give you information that you can't get any other way. Let's put it that way.
Well, I've worked with paranormal investigation for a good long time, and I've seen and heard some things that I have yet to be able to explain. And as kooky as I am, I tend to err on the side of science. I tend to figure there's got to be some, but sometimes I just can't explain it. And one of the things when people talk about hauntings, they talk about like an active haunting or an intelligent haunting versus a residual haunting, which is kind of like that imprint you're talking about, the Akashic record.
Yeah. Well, from what I've learned and what people have told me and what I've read is that there are different levels of reality, that we're in the physical realm. The one closest to us is called the astral plane. And that when some people die, some of them may have died suddenly or weren't expecting it. and they get stuck close to this reality in the Akashic plane. And that's where you get hauntings. And often some people die and they don't realize not only that they're dead, but that they don't realize that there's more that they can go on to other
Right.
realms. And so they hang around. I talked to one psychic who, whenever he hates to go near a graveyard because he says there are spirits hanging around their own graves and things like that. But anyway, so yeah, that's one thing people should know is that when you pass, and we all are going to do that eventually, you need to look for the light and go for it, because otherwise you're going to hang around. I would think it'd get pretty boring. Nobody can hear you, nobody can see you, unless they've got some of those instruments that you use when you're studying, right, sort of thing. So
well, I've often told folks that have been experiencing phenomena in their home and in their, in their safe space, it's very difficult to not be startled, to not be creeped out, weirded out. And I've often said, imagine that you're in a room with someone who can't see you, hear you, or sense you in any way under normal circumstances, and you want to get their attention. You're going to find any way to do it. The chances of you scaring the crap out of them is pretty high, because they're not going to see it coming, So
absolutely.
I think to automatically assume that all of the phenomena that people experience, even poltergeist activity to some degree, is necessarily sinister, I think is a bit. It doesn't do them a service at all. I think in many cases there should be a difference between someone who's startled and someone who's scared.
Yeah. I mean, I don't worry. That's something that I worry about. I'd be interested. I know people who have communicated with loved ones through things like telephone calls. They get a telephone call and it's this person who's dead.
That happened to me.
And also a big way lots of people do or communicate with loved ones who are gone is through dreams. They come to you in a dream. And I think that does happen. I've had, stories told to me that were just, too many things happened as a result of the dream, for example, for it to not have been something real going on there. So, yeah.
Well, it's hard to explain. I've had the experience of the phone call dream type of thing. And it was so vivid. And I think for days afterwards, and I'll tell you what, for me, made a big difference. In this case, it was a little while after the death of my father. And he and I were very, very close. And I had that dream that my phone was waking me up. This is back when people actually had like regular phones,
right,
next to the bed. And and this one was one of those cordless ones on a base. And it's probably in a museum somewhere now. But and I don't know if I was dreaming that it was waking me up, whatever the way you want to sort it out. And I would hear the crackling, because some of those things were horrible as far as the reception. And I would hear the crackling, and I wasn't sure, and I thought I heard his voice. It sounded far away. And then I'd wake up all kind of crazy. And then I would go, and I know I've told this story on the podcast before. And then I started sleeping in the living room, because I unplugged the phone in the bedroom. And I started sleeping in the living room because I was just like a little too wigged. It was disturbing. And I woke up one night on the couch, with the TV on, and it was like 3 a.m. And I look, and he is as sure as I see anything in this room, he was standing right in front of me. And we had words. We talked it out. I hugged him. I could smell him. I could feel him. So anybody could say, well, Rock, you're a creative gal. You have very vivid dreams. Maybe that's just how vivid you dream, and it was your grief and all. And there's lots of things. But the one thing I almost want to say, does it matter whether it was or it wasn't, because the ends justify the means, because the sense of peace and some of the closure I got from that was incredibly therapeutic.
Well, that's interesting. And it reminds me of, I mentioned earlier about Julie Bichelle, who is the pharmacologist, the PhD in pharmacology, who studied psychics and mediums.
Right.
And of course, she wanted to know about her mother. Well, I asked her, I said, well, did you finally have a psychic get in touch with your mother? And she said, no, actually, my mother came to me in a dream. And that satisfied my curiosity. But she kept on studying the psychics anyway.
Well, it's fascinating. I think I've definitely spoken with people that I feel have made genuine connection. To something. They've tapped into whatever it was. They relayed something to me that made me feel that they were in a unique connection with the essence of someone who had passed, and indeed were offering information and things that would not be gleaned in, you couldn't do it in any kind of Barnum and Bailey way. It was definitely something specific.
I had an uncle who told me that he had a good friend who came to see him one evening and gave him some information about things like his will and where the key to the safe deposit box was and things like that. And the next morning, he found out that the man was dead.
Oh dear! So he was leaving him his honey-do list.
He the man's ghost, should I say?
Okay.
Came to see him to give him this information because he was already dead.
Oh, so he needed to take care of business.
But the man, my uncle, didn't know that he was dead until the next day.
That's amazing. So a lot of us, and I say us in the sense that I know that there's a variety of different belief systems throughout the world, and there's a variety of different cultural beliefs, and there's a lot of us that, and I was raised very Roman Catholic, and my mom is a very devout Catholic to this day. Folks who know me know better than I'm not, but the thing is that the dogma of the heaven, hell, purgatory, and how that works is, unique to most of your Christian religions. And then you have reincarnation in some of the Eastern religions and things like that, and the consciousness of the. Is anybody right? Is everybody wrong? Or does everybody have a little bit of the right idea? How does that work?
I think everybody has a little bit of the right idea. I don't think that there is a hell like the one that most Christians imagine, the fire and brimstone and Satan and, burning and torture. I've had people who had near-death experiences that had a hell-like experience, but that was not really what they experienced. And when they came back, they got their act together, so it wasn't going to happen again. But that's a very small percentage of the near-death experiences. I think it's less than 15% have a hell-like experience. And the others, whether they're a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or an atheist, usually have a pretty nice experience, a beautiful, a loving kind of wonderful thing, embraced by the light sort of experience. Here's what I think is true. And some of your listeners are going to think I'm nuts, and maybe you will too. But I've, having studied this for more than 40 years, I have come to the conclusion, and I'm just now finishing a book where I give what I call proof that consciousness, mind, creates matter, not the other way around. Our science, our scientific materialist point of view is that all that exists is matter, and therefore matter, the brain, must create consciousness, which is, your mind. And yet science has never been able to figure out how that happens. And the reason and they call it the hard problem, because they haven't been able to figure it out after 150 years of believing that. And the reason they haven't been able to figure out that is because they've got it backwards. It's the other way around. Matter does not create consciousness. Consciousness creates matter. And one of the proof points that I give on that is that in the double slit experiment, the quantum mechanics experiment with the light and the double slit, the researcher's mind changes waves into particles in the form of protons. So in that case, the researcher's mind creates matter out of the potential, which is waves. And it would take too much time to go into the detail of how that works. But anyway, my belief at this point is that we are part of and characters within a dream that the infinite mind, if you want to call it God, you can. I'm not going to call it God. I'm going to call it the infinite mind, a sort of dream that the infinite mind is having, and that we are each characters in that dream, and that at our core, we are connected to, and really more like extensions of, that infinite mind. We're each a little piece of it, and we're each a window onto it. And that's how things like synchronicities, which are, of course, meaningful coincidences,
Sure.
things like that happen, because we're all part of the same dream. We're all really one at the core. Mystics have been saying we're all one for thousands of years. So
True.
that's my view of reality at this point. And if you're interested in it, go to my website, get my new book, which I call Proof That Mind Creates Matter. And
I think it's a brilliant concept, because I think it's definitely something that makes as much, if not more, sense than anything else I've heard. So I apologize. I don't think you're crazy. Not yet, anyway. But we've always had that's a running theme in a lot of spiritualities, that we are all part of a greater whole. And I think it's very interesting how you're putting out that the consciousness creates the matter, not the other way around.
Yeah.
I must have one short, chubby soul. That's all I can say. But it's, I also was wondering, when we were talking about, like you said, very few people have a hell experience. I actually recently interviewed a lady who did, and went into it. And I often wonder, is perception reality? In other words, if someone was raised, like in her case, she was raised in a very Catholic concept of spirituality. So in her mind, it's heaven, hell, purgatory, and all of the other details and bits that go with it. And that mirrored her experience. And I was wondering if it's sort of like, I don't know, the Hindus probably said it best, that truth is one, but men call it by many names. And so whether someone with a different perception is going to have a different experience, but it's really all kind of the same facet of the same idea.
Well, I think that you've heard it said, and I think probably it's pretty common knowledge, that your beliefs do create your reality to a certain extent. There's a wonderful book that was written more than 100 years ago called As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. And it's a little book that I think anybody who is interested ought to read. It doesn't take very long, but it really shows how, what you expect, what you think. If you believe that you're a victim, you're going to be a victim. You're going to attract situations that cause you to be a victim. If you think you're going to hell because you did something, you probably will go to hell, have a hell-like experience. Doesn't mean you have to stay there for eternity. You have to kind of wake up and say, hey, wait a minute, I really don't like it here. How about showing me which way the elevator is or something?
Where's the door?
Yeah. But I don't, the idea of burning in hell, that's a good way to get people to behave, I suppose. But I don't think it's reality Anyway, I do. Here's what I think. And I got this from a guy called Swedenborg. He was a Swedish count or duke, some sort of a noble back in the 18th century, I guess he was. And he apparently had a psychic experience, and after that could kind of go back and forth between the dimensions. And he did a lot of exploring. And basically what he said was that there are 7 levels of the beyond. There are probably many more. As Jesus said, in my Father's house, there are many rooms. But he said there are 7 levels. The middle one, between, the one in the right, the middle, third down, is very much like this reality here in the physical plane, where you've got good people and bad people, and it's all mixed up. You can go either way. On up is toward more heavenly, more angel-like, more love, so on and so forth. Down is eventually what would be called hell, but it's not really hell in the sense of the fire and brimstone. And what he says is that you go to the level where you feel comfortable, where you really choose where you want to be, because in the sense that you are going to be around other people who are like you and that you feel comfortable with. So if you're some sort of murderer like Jeffrey Dahmer or something like that, you're going to be down at the lowest level with all these other creeps who are like that. But you're going to be in a place where you're comfortable. I'll tell you one more thing, and this will be it on that subject. I interviewed a psychiatrist who had worked at a mental institution in California for 20 years. And he said that he eventually was able to speak to disembodied spirits through people who were schizophrenic, and that these disembodied spirits were what he called evil spirits who believed that there was nothing wrong with what they were doing and what they were getting these schizophrenics to do. It was just who they were and what they were like. That he would have long conversations with them through the nutty person that he was dealing with.
Wow.
So there you go.
That's heavy.
It is heavy.
That is really heavy. So, with hell being a perception, I guess, or like I said, it's sort of the way you, like you said, you go where you kind of feel comfortable. In pop culture, one of the there has been a recent series that was very much somewhat campy, and it was from a graphic novel, the TV show Lucifer. But there's this pivotal scene when they're talking about hell, and at one point he kind of thinks everybody. He just says it's absolute madness. The door is right there and it's open, just nobody walks out.
Yeah.
And I think that that's I believe Neil Gaiman put that series together. It's brilliant, but I think that was a very astute spiritual commentary.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the conclusion I've come to. You go where you feel comfortable. You stay, and you probably are part of a soul group that kind of hangs around together between incarnations, and maybe when you're asleep, you join up with them and have a chat. But I don't think there's anything to be scared about. And it's unfortunate that some denominations of Christianity have taken that tact, And also the thing about reincarnation.
Oh, it's become weaponized.
Well,
really has.
Jesus apparently believed in reincarnation. The story of the when he came upon the blind man and his the man who had been born blind, and his disciples said, Rabbi, what caused this man to be born blind? Did he sin, or was it his parents who sinned? And Jesus said, oh, it's neither one. It's so that the power of God or the Father could be shown, or something like that. But he didn't say it wasn't his sin, which would have indicated the guy had to have had a previous existence, had to have had a previous life in order to have sinned and be born blind in this one. And there are other things like that. He also said that John the Baptist was Elijah. Elijah lived 400 years before John the Baptist. Christianity was, reincarnation was part of Christianity until 551, which was I think it was 551, the Second Council of Constantine. And Constantine, the emperor, wanted to get rid of that doctrine, probably because you could more easily control people if they didn't think they'd have a second chance. And the Pope and the bishops didn't want to get rid of it, but they knuckled under and did. So it was part of the Christian church and doctrine for 500 years. But it was done away with, and so people think it doesn't exist. But it does. The
I've
universe.
definitely had deja vu, and I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling of going to a place or meeting someone, and it's almost like it's on the tip of your tongue, but you can't figure out where you know them from, where why everything is so familiar, this particular place you've never been before, and that type of thing. So reincarnation stories of previous lives has been prolific in your work as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I have a couple of books on reincarnation. The University of Virginia School of Medicine has a division called the Division of Perceptual Studies. And they have been studying children's and investigating children's memories of past lives since 1962. That's 60 years. And in 1967, they got a big grant from the guy who invented the Xerox machine to continue studying reincarnation. And so they formed a division called the Division of Perceptual Studies, which still exists. I've interviewed the head of that twice. They have over 2,600 cases of children who remember past lives that they have studied. And they say that they have solved 1,700 plus of those cases, which means that they have found someone that the child described their by name, family members, job, place where they lived, those kinds of specific information, how they died, that match up to what the child says and what he remembered. And so they've come to the conclusion it's a real thing. The University of Virginia has. And in fact, the Division of Perceptual Studies, the head of that, says that the brain does not create consciousness. The brain is a receiver of consciousness that integrates it with the body. And not just the reincarnation is used to they have also been studying near-death experiences, how some people who have Alzheimer's or dementia become lucid right before they die, and where people who have very little brain tissue, like those with what is it called, water on the brain, encephalitis, are able to have pretty normal intelligence, some actually above normal. And the bottom line is the brain, that the body and the brain is a way to bring that consciousness into this physical reality. That's their conclusion after 60 years of study.
I remember there was a case that I think a lot of people might recall this only because it got so much attention. I want to say it was on something like 2020 or one of the evening news magazine shows, where it was, if I recall correctly, somewhere in the Midwest, a young boy had recollections of World War II.
Yeah, the fighter pilot.
Correct. Yes.
Shot down the plane. Yes. His plane was shot down at the Battle of Iwo Jima. He was actually from New Orleans, or at least from Louisiana.
Oh, okay.
So and interestingly, his parents were Southern Baptists, who, of course, would not.
Yeah, they wouldn't go for all this kind of hooey,
But he had all kinds of specific memories about the plane he flew, about the names of
names, places,
aircraft carrier with him.
Very detailed.
Yeah, so detailed. And in fact, his father took him to a reunion of the members of that aircraft carrier during that time, and he recognized them, and he said they're so old, because they were. This was 20 years ago, but they probably all dead now. They could have. But anyway, yeah, I mean, that was a spectacular case. I think his name was John Houston, and Lindinger was the name in this life. John Lindinger. He was John in both cases.
Interesting. So well, children seem, and it's often been discussed, and I think it's a relatively common belief that for the most part, children, for lack of a better term, are far more psychic than adults.
Well, they're much closer to having been there. And they have less of an ego, usually. You hadn't developed as much, and so they're closer to their subconscious and to the rest of the consciousness that we're all part of. So
I also think they don't get so jaded; they don't know to reject it.
Right.
As we get older, we get jaded. That's
Yeah.
make believe, don't you know? And then you start questioning. That's when somebody shakes loose they start peeling away the backing.
And they say, "Oh, that can't be. You're just imagining that."
Right.
Blah, blah. And they begin to believe that. It reminds me of a poem that I studied in college. Wayne Wordsworth, who talks about, I think it's called "Imitations of Immortality," and it's part of it is, nothing can recall the hour of splendor in the grass and glory in the flower. It's the child remembers is just come from that dimension where he still has that sort of glow about him, and he sees things that we adults just dismiss. So yeah, it's true. Children are closer to that than we are.
Yeah,
And that's true of the children who remember past lives. By the time they're 6 or 7, they stop talking about it and even forget about it.
Yeah, I actually I'm acquainted with a dear friend whose son had a very significant experience like that, and I had said, "Oh, great, let's get him on the podcast." And he's in his 20s now, and she's like, "Yeah, he doesn't really remember it anymore. he was that was a long time ago." And and so I think that's fascinating, and so it says something about us as adults. Like, what are we doing to ourselves that at one point in time we just kind of like poo-poo everything, and we're missing out on the big picture? And it maybe to keep a little bit of childlike wonder and curiosity, and trying to keep in touch with that. But looking at in general, like you've done exhaustive studies, zillions of interviews and everything, and you're learning, to go through your books, you're kind of getting pieces of the big picture as we're putting the puzzle together. Looking outside of that, from your research and from what you a lot of the experts, because there's a lot of experts are saying, are people like Edgar Cayce and Joseph Cunningham, are those types of people closer to getting the full picture? Like you said, you mentioned the Rosicrucians kind of have the right idea, and is this a big part of it? I've always wondered if the spirituality was obfuscating the actual science of this, that this was a lot more with having to do with what Einstein had going on.
Yeah, well, what Einstein had going on, Einstein said E equals mc squared, which means energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. And what he's saying is that mass, as we think of it, doesn't really exist. Everything is energy. And that is where I get back to this dream, because there is no real matter. It's only part of this dream that the infinite mind is having, and it's energy. But I will say this about Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce was absolutely fascinating.
Yes.
People don't know about him. He lived from 1877 to 1945. He was in the 20th century called the Sleeping Prophet. He was able to go into, and I could go into the story of how it happened. Actually, I interviewed Edgar Cayce's son, Edgar Evans Cayce,
Oh, wow.
in 2007, and he was 95 years old at the time, but he was very sharp. Told me all about his dad and how growing up in that household was what it was like, and how his father became psychic like that. He wasn't really born that way. He was a very religious man. He was a Presbyterian who, at the age of 17, I believe, decided he would read the Bible all the way through for every year of his life, which he did throughout his life. He did not believe in reincarnation. He was a good Christian. He taught Sunday school. He lived at Virginia Beach, and I've been down there many times to the Association of Research and Enlightenment, which is at 68th and Atlantic Avenue, where it's the institution that was founded based and has all his papers and everything, and library. And anyhow, what he did every day from the time that he realized he had this ability, he would go into a trance. His wife would ask him the question. She would get a letter from somebody who had wanted to know why they had this problem and what they ought to do about it. And most of his readings, the 14,000 of them that are there in that building, in that Association of Research and Enlightenment, 14,000 readings he did, most of them are on health issues. And he would somehow be able to diagnose the problem and give a way to relieve it or to cure it. And people who had been to the doctor and weren't cured would ask him, and he would give them a way to cure their problem. What happened was that he started getting these questions about health issues and other psychic kind of problems that stemmed from a previous life. And it was because someone was afraid of, say they were afraid of snakes. Well, maybe they were killed by a snake in the previous life, right. Or maybe they were afraid of water, and maybe it was because they drowned in a previous life. And so this sort of thing started coming out, and that was not what he expected, because he didn't believe in reincarnation. So for a while, he stopped giving these readings, but he decided to read the Bible and see what he could find there. And he read the Bible through, which he did every year anyway, and realized that reincarnation is all through the Bible. They just don't call it that. It says in the Apostles' Creed, resurrection of the dead. Well, how do you think that's going to happen? So anyway, Edgar Cayce is fascinating, and I would highly recommend, I've got a book called Edgar Cayce, The Meaning of Life and What to Do About It. And I put the information in there from my interview with Edgar Evans Cayce, with Kevin Toteski, who is the CEO of the Association of Research and Enlightenment, and another fellow whose name escapes me right now, who's been studying Cayce's readings and has got a PhD and all that. And it really, basically what it boils down to is we come into a life with something we either want to do or we want to learn. And it often has to do with situations from past lives that we want to resolve. And that's a big message of the Cayce readings. And of course, there's much more to it than that, but it's very interesting. Back to you.
It is interesting. And again, the name of the book you're referencing that you wrote is The Meaning of Life and What to Do About It.
Yeah, it's Edgar Cayce, The Meaning of Life and What to Do About It.
Got it. One last thing. I think that a lot of people are afraid of death. I'm not 100% sure if they're afraid of like physical pain, messy, painful death, or if they're afraid of what happens when they die, or both. All are valid. What would you have to tell people that are terrified to die?
I would say that that there's nothing that apparently, and this is from talking to a lot of people who've had near-death experiences, it's usually not even painful. It's like you leave your body before it gets ugly. Really painful. And once you're out, it can be a wonderful, magnificent experience. And you're reunited with others who've gone before, your mother, your father, your grandparents, your sisters, brothers, whoever's passed before. That it's something that it's glorious in most cases. Obviously, some people do have hell-like experiences, but if you don't, I think that has to do with what they're expecting, like we said earlier. I'm a little bit, and I'm not afraid to die anymore. I used to be, but before I had that first out-of-body experience, I was really depressed about the idea of death.
Right.
And it's kind of, you become kind of nihilistic when you think that, what's life all about? I mean, here, you live, you have a rough time, and then you die, but that's not what it's all about. It's really about evolving and learning and enjoying life, and then passing on, and maybe come back again if you want to. I will quote Woody Allen about death. He said, "I'm not afraid of death. I just don't want to be there when it happens."
Well, apparently you've got a little bit of reassurance for us all. Once again, folks can check out all of your stuff at shmartin.com. And that includes lists of your books, stuff, how to get in touch with your podcast, The Truth About Life, and also information on Oakley Press.
Absolutely. Please do come to it. Up at the top, you'll see in my menu, it says fiction and nonfiction books. Click on that. You'll see covers of them. You can click on a cover. It'll go to the page on Amazon. You can read about it. You can read the first couple of chapters. You can see what people have said about it in reviews. You might even want to buy one. Who knows?
You never know. I'm sure they will, because it sounds like you've done an amazing body of work. And I can't thank you enough for coming and talking about it with us.
Rocky, I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Very much. And thank you all for listening. And remember, stay kooky out there. Thank you for listening to Macabre World. You can find us on the web at www.darkerartsstudio.com.